hastily made provocation was visible to the naked eye. The Western propaganda machine was at full capacity, and it started to spin the news item about it, and the Western countries have been promoting their lies with great energy.
Цель кампании.
Those pseudo witnesses and the main aim of the campaign, it was clear. It was a campaign of the war party that needed to torpedo the understandings reached at the time during the Istanbul talks aimed at a peaceful settlement of the Ukrainian crisis. Russia has repeatedly provided recent refutations of the numerous fakes about Bucha. During the period when this village was under the control of the Russian military, the civilian population was able to move freely around it, and civilians used mobile communications, received humanitarian aid. Our units left Bucha on the 30th of March 2022. This was confirmed by the mayor of the town, Anatoly Fedoruk, who on the 31st of March, in a video message, stated there were no Russian armed forces in the village. And there was no mention about the victims of mass shootings in the streets, whom he could not fail to notice. It was only after the Ukrainian armed forces, accompanied by foreign journalists, entered the village, the so-called irrefutable evidence of crimes in Bucha, it was actually a bloody staging by the Kiev regime and its Western handlers. The organizers of this staging, of course, do their best in order for no objective investigation to be held. They dismiss this argument. They continue to lie. They do their best in order not to reply to the obvious question, where is the list of victims? What are their names? Who are those people? We understand that the Ukrainian militants will not reveal their own atrocities, because otherwise this house of cards, it will just break. Russia does its best in order to identify the true perpetrators, to bring them to justice. We make efforts to obtain assistance from the United Nations, and we have addressed the Secretary General and the High Commissioner for Human Rights. We have sent requests in order to publish requests. Bodies found in Bucha, actually they were lying there. Who do they mean? They were shown by the Western media. These questions, of course, remain unanswered. These questions have been asked to Guterres by Sergei Lavrov several times, and there was no reply. In September 2024, through the Russian Permanent Mission in New York, we submitted to the United Nations Secretariat a request prepared by the Investigative Committee together with the Prosecutor General's Office. A request to investigate the circumstances of the provocation in Bucha, but there was no substantive response. Such actions testify that the initiators of the staging in Bucha are, of course, the Kiev regime and its Western handlers. They have something to hide. The functionaries of international organizations who have taken unequivocally pro-Ukrainian positions, they do not shy of covering up their criminal acts. We know about the preparation of the so-called international conference on Bucha in May this year, with the assistance of the United Kingdom. There is no doubt this provocation will become yet another step to pull old manuals out of dusty cupboards and attempt to present in a new wrapper the fakes about the alleged involvement of the Russian armed forces in this staging in Bucha. The aim is the same. Many politicians speak about peace now. We know this scenario. As soon as talks about peace start, we need to wait provocations by the Kiev regime and its Western handlers. All these talks, they will just need to be obstructed. That's why those conferences are held. And a very interesting issue, we have drawn attention to statements in the National Assembly of France by Minister for Overseas Territories Manuel Valls on the construction of yet a second French military base on the island of Mayotte. The territoriality of this island has been enshrined in the UN General Assembly Resolutions 3385 and Resolution 2469. Russia is against militarization of any territories that causes threats for security of certain regions. It's also concerning the Indian Ocean territory. The military base on the island of Mayotte that already exists in the settlement of Saudi that is aimed not only against external threats, as Paris tries to convince everyone, but to control the overseas territories. It's one of the remnants of colonial epoch. And we remember the Operation Vambusha in 2023. It was forcible eviction of Comorians by the French authorities, whom they consider as illegal migrants. And that resulted in a humanitarian crisis in the archipelago. We consider that it is a relapse of neo-colonial instincts of Paris and a clear demonstration of its lack of desire to respect the territorial integrity of the Comorian Islands and its selective approach to the UN General Assembly resolutions. Regarding the historical memory, in the Netherlands, the city of Leusden, on the territory of the Memorial Cemetery, the Soviet Field of Glory, where 865 Red Army soldiers are buried. This project, implemented for 5 years, it was a common effort of Russia, the Netherlands, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Kazakhstan, and Uzbekistan to commemorate the victims of Nazism. The museum represents the testimonies of victims of the atrocities by Nazis in the Netherlands, atrocities against Soviet prisoners of war. There is evidence by one of the prisoners of the Nazi concentration camps. The main creator was Remco Reding, a journalist and public activist, head of the Soviet Field of Glory Fund. He improves the territory of the cemetery, and in Russia and other CIS countries, the relatives have been traced, relatives of those buried in the cemetery. We would like to express our gratitude to those who participate in this noble and very important project. It was on the eve of the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War. It's significant. I would like to underline that despite many unsuccessful efforts by some forces in the West in order to keep silence, to denigrate the role of the Soviet Union in the victory over Nazism, there are still people in the Kingdom of the Netherlands who honor the feat of the Soviet heroes and understand that it is very important to preserve the historical memory about the role of our country in the defeat of Nazi Germany. A testimony of that are warm words of the visitors of the museum, deeply impressed by the tragic personal stories of Soviet soldiers who gave their lives to liberate Europe from the brown plague. One more issue, humanitarian aid to Islamabad for the population of Pakistan. With the help of the Red Crescent Society, the cargo will be transferred to those in need. Russian-Pakistani cooperation in humanitarian sphere will be continued further. Tomorrow, on the 28th 8th of March, ESCAP marks its 78th anniversary from its creation. The decision was taken during the UN Economic and Social Council meeting in 1947. ESCAP has approved collective approaches for the development of Asia-Pacific region. Russia has been a member since 1995, sub-regional, and since 1995 regional member, and included participating in many areas of its activities: energy, transport, trade, environment, and many other topics. Our experts participated in the elaboration of intergovernmental agreement on dry ports of international importance, ESCAP framework agreement of facilitation of cross-border paperless trade in Asia and the Pacific of 2016, trilateral Russia-Mongolia-China intergovernmental agreement on international road transport along the Asian highway network of 2016. ESCAP has become a reliable partner for our country in providing technical assistance, including Central Asia and West Caucasia. We value the Commission's assistance in developing our competence in the social economic areas. We intend to continue to provide political experts and financial support to ESCAP. Another important international event yesterday in Murmansk, International Forum, the Arctic Territory of Dialogue, started its work. Its motto is "Live in the North." It is held since 2010. It's a major platform for discussion of the relevant problems and perspectives of the Arctic region with foreign partners. It will include 20 sessions, perspectives of the development of the Northern Sea route will be discussed, support of business in the Arctic, the development of northern cities, HR projects, environment, and new national projects. Experts and scientists will discuss in a comprehensive way the possibilities of establishing security and cooperation in the region, exchange views on the prospects of the implementation of cultural and scientific projects. It reflects one of our key priorities in development of Arctic territories: comprehensive renewal, improvement of cities, villages, creation of modern new workplaces, year-round navigation on the Northern Sea route. I would remind, it's well known, but the Russian Arctic, it has a lot of opportunities for creative work to engage the forces and the talents of young people, of representatives of different jobs, creative scientific initiatives, and in this large-scale work, we are interested in cooperation with all partners and integration association. The cultural program of the forum covers the major role of the regions in our country and modern tendencies and the image of the future of the extreme north. Much attention has been paid to indigenous people, their culture, their traditions. The gastronomical festival, the Taste of the Arctics, the team of restaurateurs and chefs will present regional cuisine. It's just very tasty, even tasty to speak about that. The projects of northern seas, products of local products will be tasted there. And at the festival there will be a 25-meter tunnel with ice engravings dedicated to the 500th anniversary of the development of the Northern Sea route. One more important date this year, as you know, it's the centenary of ARTEC. We talk about that a lot. We post a lot of materials on the ministry website and on social media, our social media. these solemn many events will be held year-round, but of course the main festivities are planned for June, the date itself, the date of the centenary. Artek is a major children's center in the world. Its territory is 218 hectares. More than 40,000 children from Russia and from abroad participate. It's just development of their personalities, their talents. It's the true capital of the country of childhood that lives a very bright, very intensive life year-round. In this jubilee of Artek, every shift creates all the conditions for future generations for their development. As well as there will be many areas like the 80th anniversary of a great victory, the centenary of Artek, the project Our Heroes, the movement of the first. It will be aimed at civic duty, patriotism, respect for elders, and strengthening traditional, spiritual, and moral values. Artek participates in national projects in the sphere of education, culture, digital economy, promotes its unique experience. In the regions, the center has had a very strong international component. Artek continues its development. Such new areas are formed. It's not new, actually, but it has not been long the center of children diplomacy. More than 10,000 people from 105 countries in the world. It's very pleasant. I'm very glad about that. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2016 participated actively in the life of Artek that year. I remember back then we had star counselors. We came there with foreign journalists, created a press tour. We were counselors in Хрустальный unit specialized in journalism. It was a fantastic experience for the young people and for us as well. It was a true unification. The 100th history of Artek, it's not only about education sphere, it's about heroism, it's about bravery. During the years of the Second World War, Artek underwent occupation. It was 2 years and a half. On the 15th of April 1945, Artek was liberated by the fighters of the Separate Coastal Army. After that, it was restored. In August 1944, Artek was attended by 400 children of the Crimean partisans. In May 1985, a monument to the liberators of Artek was opened in order to honor the 40th anniversary of the victory of the Soviet people in the Great Patriotic War. I think Artek was not only restored back then after the Second World War, its condition. The condition it suffered after reunification with Russia. Russian experts, teachers, it was just very impressive. When we came there in 2016, we were just so impressed. And to say we were shocked is just to say nothing. After we saw the photos, it was just 1 year and a half. It's just regained its true shape, because with the Kiev regime that was back then still trying to associate itself with some democratic processes, under the Kiev regime, this camp, it was just anything but a children educational upbringing center for recreation and for education. It was anything but that. Restaurants, something for adults, hotels. It was just a public place. It was not sports facilities. Just empty areas or some areas where rubbish was stored. It was just a joint work of the state, of business, of public figures. Artek is just started to live again, started to live fully, and started to operate fully. And during those festivities, this jubilee, the Open Text Publishing House published a book, Artek 400. It's a history of every Artek shift. Just imagine 1925 till 2025. It was a former Artek counselor. She worked there in 1970s. Now she's PhD in philosophy, associate professor at the Moscow Pedagogical State, Nadezhda Prodina. The book contains important historical documents about its creation. Camp on the bank, on the shore of the Black Sea became popular among children from all over the world, children diplomacy developing, and the true friendship of Artek children they kept for their entire life. This book is a memory of the true epoch, a window to the world of the childhood, of friendship, and it's just discoveries for the young generation.
Since 1925, it has information about sessions with statistics, the number of children who came there, with the number of events who took place there every year. It's a huge work accompanied by a lot of photos and documents that helps the reader see the life history of this place. This book was made with the use of modern technologies, so you can use QR codes to listen to Artek songs and to watch documentaries about Artek. It's a unique book, and I invite you to have a look at it. Artek approaches its anniversary with a fantastic work. They do not only conduct events, but they also have such things about its history. I'm prepared to answer questions. Is International Affairs with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Recently, editor-in-chief of the Italian International Reporters, Andrea Lucidi, who regularly tells in his articles the truth about situation in Donbass, wasn't let out of Estonia to come back to Russia. How can you comment on this, given the fact that the Estonian authorities are anti-Russian? That would be surprising if the Estonian authorities would act otherwise. Did you expect anything else from them? Indeed, the editor-in-chief of International Reporters, Andrea Lucidi, is considered to be an enemy of all neo-Nazi and Russophobe regimes. He is well known for his criticism of neo-Nazism. He is well known regarding this in the Baltic state. He was not let out of Estonia to come back to Russia. He regularly works on the permanent basis in our country and has been covering the special military operation. In November 2024, he addressed President Putin with a request to grant him citizenship because in Italy he was persecuted, and on January 29th he became a full-fledged citizen of our country. On March 18th, the Estonian border soldiers arrested him under the pretense that he takes illegally to Russia money and drones. They were not even ashamed that all these things were with him when he entered Estonia. But Estonian authorities has to feel shame in its fullest. these actions are guided by the aspiration of the Estonian authorities to make their life more complicated for those who has other point of view on international affairs. And essentially, I have an impression that they start a hunt against anti-fascists. Estonia got used to, I'm not talking about ordinary people, but about the regime, got used to that the ideological opponents not shouldn't be talked with. They have a behavior to resort to dirty methods, from smaller deeds to criminal persecution, illegal persecution, and the Estonian authorities consider all Russian-speaking people as such, and everyone who has Russian passports. This is not the first time that the Estonian authorities and authorities of our Baltic states impedes Russian to come back to Russia. This is discrimination. This is blatant Russophobia. This is the manifestation of neo-Nazism. And what is neo-Nazism? It's not what happened in 1930s, 1940s. It is a philosophy, a certain philosophy promoting hatred against peoples and countries. All of this is of nationalist character. And officials are involved in this. Given the persecution of our citizens, we see violation of freedom of speech and now even freedom of movement. Unlike the EU, we adhere to freedom of speech. Russia is ascribed some terrible things with foreign journalists, but journalists have an opportunity to work in our country in line with the legislation of our country and to fulfill their duty. They are granted visas, accreditations, they're invited for events, even more. They can work fully without hindrance at the event, not like in Great Britain. They invite journalists, but they did not let journalists to attend the event because they didn't have suitable footwear, for example. I saw that today we accredited media from various countries, including unfriendly countries. We answer written requests. No one avoids the contacts with journalists, but when the rules of accreditation are violated, when the legislation is violated, we always say this. Even when we respond to something, we say that it's only as a response. This is their camera crews, how they hit them from all possible types of armaments supplied by the West cannot be described. In recent days, following targeted attacks, including through high-precision, long-range armaments, 4 media representatives were killed, 3 besides other civilians were severely wounded on March 24th, as you know, on the territory of the LPR, following a targeted artillery strike. Известия journalist Alexander Fedorchuk, Zvezda TV channel cameraman Andrei Panov, and the driver of the camera crew Alexander Serkeli were killed. The journalist Nikita Galdin survived miraculously. also on duty in the Sudzha region, the Crux region, Ukrainian Banderovets wounded journalist Alexander Skratov on March the 27th in the Belgorod region. A vehicle of the Channel 1 camera crew hit a mine. Because of that, Russian journalist Anna Prokofiev was killed. All our diplomats extended condolences to the families and loved ones of the deceased journalist. Rest in peace. Those who died on duty, on their professional duty. We wish those who were wounded to get better as soon as possible. It is clear that the Kiev regime that became a lump of hatred and anger try, because of their weakness, to compensate their losses on the battlefields through strikes on civilians who, under the international humanitarian law, include media representatives. Here we celebrate the 80th anniversary of the great victory on May 9th, 1945. Our multinational people defeated Nazism and fascism, but after that, on May 10th, many victors, unfortunately, couldn't come back home because soldiers continued from the ruins, from unexpected places, to kill them in this anger of weakness. The same thing happens with the Kiev regime. The office of the president continued to give attention, as much attention as possible. But why? To prove to the sponsors and their people that they didn't exterminate it completely, that ostensibly nothing, not everything is lost. To hit Russian journalists who didn't have something but cameras and microphones. They even used expensive, high-precision MLRS armaments. That means that they knew for sure who they're using it against. The Kiev regime ignore the norms of the international law. Relevant international structures continue to ignore this as well, like UNESCO General Director, the UN High Commissioner on Human Rights, turning blind eye to this, as well as other multilateral institutions, let alone numerous human rights NGOs, on whose perennial conscious silence and inaction this monster was nurtured. It is them, as one Western guidelines mentions, strategic silence made the criminals on bunker to feel that they are unpunished and can do everything they want. And now this continues to encourage Ukrainian Nazis to commit more crimes. We saw comments, the OSCE commentary. One thing, we were shocked by the phrase that the OSCE, as it said by its representative, is always opposes killings of all journalists. But I have a question. Then why do we need a specialized institution for this? If we can record this phrase one more time, or to put them on a table and put it at the OSCE that this organization is always against the killings of journalists. Probably special representatives shouldn't be paid for this. Probably conferences are not needed for this. There have been thousands of them. Probably we don't need expensive apparatus of these officials of the OSCE. Accounts on the internet are not needed. Probably they shouldn't go around and teach others how to live. If one phrase is enough as a logo, or to put it on a screen. If countries pay for this organization, then please notice who launched strikes and who is to be to blame. The UN, with headquarters at the UN, said that they did not have special mandate to investigate. You don't have a mandate, but then how do you investigate without mandate all other cases when you find words to accuse our country? Then remember that you don't have mandate for this. To identify that the Kiev regime is happy to kill Russian journalists, you don't need mandate. You just have to read their quotes. You don't need mandate for this, because the resolutions of the General Assembly and the Security Council state that it is unacceptable to kill civilians and journalists. Yet again, our delegation, our permanent mission to the UN in New York, Geneva, Paris, will strive to achieve full-fledged commentaries of the spokespeople in these institutions about bloody killings of Russian journalists by the Kiev regime. Now about the situation around Ukraine in general. Crimes that Ukrainian Nazis commit against civilians and civil infrastructure of our country confirm that our soldiers fight neo-Nazi and hateful ideology. Detailed information about crimes of the Banderovics is collected and structured by the International Public Tribunal, presided by Maxim Grigoriev. Recently, his report was published. During last briefing, we talked about the presentation of this document. The fact included there terrify. For example, POWs were beheaded, their limbs were drilled through, they were shot at. They abused people in ways that we are afraid even to talk about. They were tortured with electricity, beaten up with metal tubes, ropes, sticks, hammers, bats. In hospitals, they were cut off without painkillers. The supporters of the Nazi doctor and sadist Joseph Mengele won't go away with it and will be punished, as all the spokesperson of international institutions turn a blind eye on this. According to the data of the Investigative Committee of Russia in the Kursk region since 2022 up to now, following the crimes of the Ukrainian armed army, 167 civilians were killed, 500 wounded, 43,000 people were recognized as affected. Thousands of facilities of civil infrastructure were destroyed. There is a practice to give permits to residents of Suja to go around the city. If people do not have them, they were taken to garrison headquarters, they were questioned. The Ukrainian army organized looting raids from the Suma region only last week. According to the ambassador at large of Russian MFA, Rodion Miroshnik, 16 civilians were killed, 133 wounded, including 4 minors. The Kiev regime continues to strike on energy infrastructure of the Russian Federation. On March 25th, 27th, there were attacks of drone attacks on energy facilities on the territories of Bryansk and Kursk regions. A strike on gas storage tank in Crimea was thwarted, and Zelensky publicly said that he agrees to the agreements reached in Riyadh on March 24th between Russia and the US to cease strikes on the civil infrastructure. Now about punishments to the criminals. The Russian courts continue to pronounce verdicts to the Ukrainian criminals. The Investigative Committee of Russia launched 736 criminal cases. 46 Ukrainian soldiers were given long sentences. 92 cases are considered by courts. 58 people are under investigation. In Absentia, foreign mercenaries, British guard Christopher was given 14.5 years in prison. Georgians Alexei Bibichadze, Mikhail Kamkhadze, Nadim Khalamadze were given 25, 23, and 14 years in prison, respectively. Now about those who sponsor all of this. The meeting of the EU leaders on March 2021 in Brussels predictably failed. It was centered around the initiative of the leader of the European so-called diplomacy, Kaja Kallas, about a new tranche of military support to Ukraine worth 40 billion euros. This sum is devoid from reality and caused resistance from a number of member states. And all of this, despite despite the fact that they welcomed Zelensky, they even reduced the volume of support to 5 billion euros, but it didn't work out. Additional 2 million artillery shells to Kiev also wasn't agreed upon, so no certain commitments to military support Ukraine wasn't adopted. The European bureaucracy isn't ensured by real possibilities of the member state, because it's clear that the resources of the European countries are far from endless. To fuel Kiev does not only mean to waste money. It's not only the fight against until the last Ukrainian, but it is the building up a threat at their own backyards. Now, when British outlets started to write about it, the Times write that uncontrolled arms in circulation in Ukraine, and the precise number is unknown even to Washington, is becoming a security problem. Journalists come to a conclusion that in some time, hundreds of thousands of armaments will end up not only in Africa and in the Middle East, but also in Europe. Will help the British journalist. This armament is already in the western part of the European continent, and we gave many examples when military products ended up in the hands of groups in Asia and Africa. And now Zelensky clients on the black market also include drug cartels in Latin America. According to the Mexican media, fighters of Cartel Golfo received Javelin American anti-tank complexes. They were supplied to Kiev earlier. It is known that the terrorists who killed on March 21st 44 people in southwest of Niger used howitzers M120.
And now let's talk about the so-called peace mission, but it's about military intervention. London and Paris continue to make plans about military intervention in Ukraine, It is disguised as the so-called peacekeeping mission on March 21st in Watford at the initiative of the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. In hybrid form, there was a meeting of military brass of 30 countries for which had quite an interesting name, Coalition of the Willing. These countries are ready to send their troops to Ukraine. This topic will continue today in Paris at the leaders' level. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that our country stands categorically against this scenario that is fraught with a direct confrontation between Russia and NATO. It is noteworthy that the British are well aware of the dangerous games that they are playing. That's why they're cowardly proposing an idea to depersonify the uniform of peacekeepers, which implies the absence of any sleeve patches of insignia. It would be far more difficult to identify them, and we understand why they're doing that. Great Britain left the EU, and once they have collapsed the European economy, they want to collapse the entire European continent. And they later are going to join the Anglo-Saxon alliance. And now I will say a few words about mobilization novelties of the Kiev regime. It continues to obediently send Ukrainian young citizens at the age of 18 and 24 who signed the so-called Millions contract. All the 17 brigades that they chose from are operating on the front line, which means that the tragic outcome is inevitable. According to Ukrainian telegram channels, new mobilization novelties are being developed. They're discussing an initiative to change the mobilization age. It will be from 20 to 55, which will replace the existing 25 and 60. Let's look in greater detail at that. They plan to lower the mobilization age by 5 years, so the Ukrainian men will be drafted at the age of 20, and it's real to implement in Ukraine. And why are they lowering the upper limit of the mobilization age from 60 to 55? Because there are fewer senior people who are ready to carry out military service in Ukraine. The Kiev establishment has shown its interest in continuing military activities because they view it as a source of its existence. They are just devouring Ukrainian citizens. In parallel, Zelensky regime is gradually implementing the misanthropic belief of the American geostrategist and Russophobe Zbigniew Brzezinski, who said, and I quote, that in 2030, he wrote that no more 20 million people should stay in Ukraine in 2030s. And I will say a few words about the preparations of the Ukrainian establishment to retain power by force. Well, it seems that they feel the growing public frustration, and they realize that the retribution for the crimes against their own citizens is inevitable, and they have lost their legitimacy, and they are preparing for retaining power by force. That explains why the Committee of the Ukrainian Rada on law enforcement activities has approved the legislation of number 10311, which allows the National Guard to use firearms, tear gas, and UAVs against civilians during mass riots. It seems that the Kiev regime is planning a scenario which is far worse than the shootings by snipers at the Maidan Square. Where is the Council of Europe? Where are the declarations and resolutions? Are they going to establish a special committee of the Council of Europe of what the Kiev regime is doing against its own civilians, UAVs, firearms and tear gas. They continue to fight historical memory there. In Dnipropetrovsk, local authorities, with the support of radical nationalists, removed a memorial plate from the monument to the heroes of the Kaidak anti-fascist underground movement. In Poltava, they have removed a memorial plate in Ukrainian that was devoted to volunteers who went to war with Nazism, and it was removed from the school number 39. And they cannot present it as fighting the Russian language or derussification policy that they have made a part of their state policy. That's a real neo-Nazism that we see here. These facts once again confirm that the special military operation is relevant, particularly its tasks to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine, as well as to address the threats emanating from its territory. And as our leadership has stated many times, all these goals will be achieved. And a fantastic statement that Zelensky made to the TV channel, just to let us remember his conversation with the American president. Zelensky said, if you can make Putin to stop war, that would be great, but he can cheat. He deceived me already after the Minsk ceasefire, and all Western media started to print that as the quote, but they didn't remember, they didn't remind it to their audience, to their readers, of what their leaders, Merkel and Hollande, deceived Ukrainian citizens and the entire international community by not implementing the Minsk agreements, because they knew from the very beginning that they wouldn't implement these documents. We have been regularly saying at our briefings that the West has always been behind the collapse of all peace initiatives in Ukraine, starting from the violent coup d'etat in February 2014. And after that, for a long period of time, in their remarks, the country guarantors of the Minsk agreements, Germany and France in particular, have expressed their commitment to peace, but the time has passed, administrations changed in these countries, and former leaders didn't hold back anymore. On December 7th, 2022, the former Chancellor of Germany, Merkel, who was in power for more than 16 years, who likes to talk about democratic processes in the West, by the way, and she was directly involved in the normative format meetings and in the development of the Minsk agreements. In her interview to the German mass media, she was quite sincere, and I quote, "The Minsk agreements," Merkel said, "were an attempt to give time to Ukraine. It also used this time to become stronger, as can be seen today. The Ukraine of 2014 and 2015 is not the modern Ukraine. I doubt," she added, "that NATO countries would be able to do as much as they are able to do today to help Ukraine." It was clear to all of us that it is a frozen conflict and the problem is not resolved. That's what brought this so much precious time for Ukraine, Merkel said. Zelensky said that he was deceived, but he didn't say who deceived him in particular. Another guarantor, former French President François Hollande, supported President and said that Merkel was right on point when she said that. He said, and I quote, the fuss, he said, around the Minsk agreements. He's referring to the normative format meetings, the UN Security Council resolutions, endless efforts of special representatives on the implementation and monitoring of implementation of the Minsk agreements. And he called it fuss around the Minsk agreements has resulted in the situation that since 2014, Ukraine has strengthened its military posture it became better. And the merit of the Minsk agreement is that the Kiev has acquired time to strengthen its army, because in 2014, NATO couldn't provide Kiev with weapons at the volume that it is doing today, and it stopped the Russian offensive for a while. End of quote. That's what the former French president said. The guarantor of the Minsk agreements is just a memoir for them. And it's not just a confession or a memoir. They are admitting their guilt, but they don't repent. At that time, in 2015, when there were hours of negotiations, they knew from the very beginning that they wouldn't implement anything. They will continue to provide the Kiev regime with weapons. But they forget to say another important thing. At that time and today, they understood and they understand that the Kiev regime is doomed. And they didn't feel bad for anyone, for women, for children, for the civil population of the Donbass or Ukraine in general. They just needed the conflict. And after that, if someone said that Russia is to blame for something and to shift the blame on Russia, because this is the same very leaders who were part of the so-called Normandy format, and they managed directly numerous political processes, including a change of power in Ukraine. What's important about this compassion that it was Western falsification. They were toying with the use of international law and pursued the only goal, which is to pump the Kiev regime with weapons and to politically prepare to the situation when hostilities started that we saw in the beginning of 2022 when the Kiev regime started the escalation in the Donbass. Remember what we talked about today. They want to put the western part of Europe on fire.